Hello, my name is Goodman from Liverpool, England, and I would like to welcome you all to the first Judaica Thematic Society presentation titled Space, Stamps and Shabbat. It is envisaged that there will be future meetings, talks and presentations in the coming months. Today we have Rachel Raz, the executive producer of the upcoming documentary Space Torah. Rachel will tell us about a limited edition stamp sheet she produced and about the forthcoming film. We also have David Ball, who will introduce us to astrophilately and will discuss how we can use our correspondence to create your own potable history exhibit. And we have Gregg Philipson, who will share with us some of his extensive collection regarding Jews on stamps, with an emphasis on Jewish astronauts. Incidentally, all three are members of the Judaica Thematic Society. I am also very pleased to welcome veteran NASA astronaut Dr. Jeff Hoffman, who flew on 5 space missions, who will conclude with what I am sure will be some interesting stories. I will just briefly explain how the Judaica Thematic Society was formed back in 2005. I am a collector of Judaica-themed stamps from all over the world. That is, any stamp that has a Jewish connection on the stamp. It could be a synagogue, Back in 2005, I could not find a society that specialized in Judaica on stamps. There were and are societies that specialize in Israel, but not Judaica. After all, I believe that Israel is Judaica, but Judaica is not Israel. I then contacted a few stamp collector friends on their thoughts of my idea, and they agreed that it was a good idea. So here we are, 15 years later, and we have a society of over 200 members from worldwide, which is free to join and publish a monthly newsletter which has interesting articles and colour illustrations, which is emailed to the members. If anyone is interested in joining, contact details will be displayed on the screen at the end of the presentation. One of my favourite stamps, which I feel typifies what Judaica is all about, is a Danish stamp issued in 1984, commemorating 300 years of the Jewish community in Denmark. The stamp depicts the familiar Friday night scene of the lady of the house lighting the Shabbat candles, goblet of wine, and the challah cloth, with the Hebrew words Shabbat Shalom. The stamp was designed by artist Marianne Nagler. Illustrated to the right is a design that was submitted to have been the actual stamp design, but was declined by the Danish Postal Authority. It shows a little girl lighting the Shabbat candles. This design was published on a limited edition postcard, signed by the artist Marianne Nagler, along with the final approved stamp postmarked on the first day of issue. On the following slide, we see the first day cover of the stamp, yet again signed by the artist M. Nagler. The cover is also signed by Bent Melchior, who was the chief rabbi of Denmark at the time. Yet again, this is a limited edition and is numbered on the reverse. On the next slide are other designs of first day covers of the same issue. In fact, I tried to collect all the cover designs that exist in this particular issue, and on this slide are a few others. I would now like to introduce you to Rachel Raz. In addition to her role as the executive producer, Rachel is the director of the Early Childhood Institute of Hebrew College in Newton, Massachusetts. She's the author of 2 children's books about Israel, and she has an extensive experience in the field of Jewish education.
Thank you, Gary, very much for the lovely introduction, and also thank you for welcoming me recently to the Judaica Thematic Society. And I want to also thank Larry Katz, who is also with us today, that introduced me to you and through the Judaica Thematic Society. My passion for stamps actually started in childhood when my uncle Leon actually introduced me to that. And over many years, with many pen pals around the world, I used to collect stamps. Also, my passion for Judaism is I was born in the Jewish faith and also grew up in Israel in loving, caring Jewish community. But my connection to space actually started later on when Ilan Ramon, the Israeli astronaut, was actually elected. As an Israeli, it was such a pride that somebody from our family was elected, and we followed his career very, very closely. And of course, every day when he was in space, we were following what he did and the little Torah that he took with him. And there was a big pride, and of course, there was a devastation when the tragedy happened with the Columbia. But later on, there was a new spark about connection to Jewish and astronaut and space when I met Jeff Hoffman at Hebrew College, where I work. So in 2016, Jeff Hoffman came to Hebrew College to share with us his journey. And I never heard about Jeff until that day, and it actually changed my journey. This is actually a picture from us at Hebrew College, and Jeff was showing a picture of him fixing the Hubble telescope. And also he shared with us that he went on 5 space missions and many other fascinating things as an astronaut. And then and the entire time I was just fascinated by his career. And then he also shared with us this picture of him reading from the Torah. And he shared with us his Jewish journey. And later on, Jeff will share with us some of this. And I will show you a clip of 30 seconds also from that moment. And the entire time I was sitting there and thinking to myself, wow, I feel so proud and I feel so wonderful to learn about Jeff's story. As a Jew from this, the same family, I never heard about him, and it was fabulous journey that I felt very much connected and proud. But also the way he spoke, I felt that it can appeal very much to students and for a new generation. And the entire lecture, I was actually sitting there and thought how I'm going to share what I learned at that meeting in 2016 with my students, with children, with educators over the years. So in the end of this lecture, I actually came to Jeff and asked him, where I can find this video and other information. And he told me that it's on his own computer. And I was shocked. I said, after 20 years, that was in 1996, it's still on your computer? And he said, yes, I was very busy with my life and I moved on. And I felt that we need to do something. So immediately I asked him, are you open to make a documentary film about it? Because I knew that we must preserve and share this inspiring story. And he said to me, if it's done professionally, so yes. So immediately, I didn't know anything about making movies at that time. And I left home, we started doing so many homework and how can I make sure that we make a movie? I didn't think that I will lead this effort, and I thought that maybe I will share this story with somebody else and they will take it. But I start working on that, and it's called Space Torah. We have a wonderful website, it's called Space Torah Project. After 3-4 months, I hired a production team. And you can see here a picture of us recording at the Museum of Science in Boston with Rabbi Shaul Osachi, and he's also on our call today. He was instrumental in Jeff's Jewish journey. And later on, I thought, how can I also bring my passion? Again, these are all some other pictures. This is Jeff as a child that we found, some of his story, his journey to become an astronaut. Me on the left, visiting Orami, where the reside. On the right, you can see us with Rabbi Osachi and our producer doing some research and learning. And then I asked myself, how can I connect it with my passion to stamps? And I was visiting with the Postal Services in Israel. I did another project with them, and this was born. It was conceived, the idea to design a stamp that will celebrate the Space Torah and will celebrate Jeff's Jewish journey in space. And we worked together and we designed this beautiful commemorative stamp. that I feel very proud of, and I think it's beautiful. We created only 200 of them, limited edition. You can see the number here, and it was actually and it's available and we did it also as part of our fundraising. It's coming in this beautiful folder, and I am doing a little to make sure. So it's $100 for them, or $360 for autograph sheet. So if you're interested to support the movie, but also have this beautiful commemorative sheet as part of your collection, or to give it as a present, please reach out to me. Again, this is the Space Torah movie will be done next month. So we are really in the final stage of our production. It's fascinating to see what we came up with, and we're looking to submit it to some Jewish film festival around the country and around the world. So if you are interested, if there is film festival in your community that you would like us to make sure that we submit the film there, please be in touch with us soon. So I now want to introduce introduce David Ball and everyone in this meeting today. These are people that I managed to meet because of this fabulous project. So David Ball is retired Lieutenant Colonel following a career as an Air Force flight nurse. In addition to teaching workshops that promote political civility, David focused on stamp collecting. He is the U.S. delegate to the International Federation of Philately, FIP, president of American Airmail Society, and a member of Society of the Israeli Philatelists. He is national judge and international exhibitor. David is also the author of 2 books, American Astrophilately, The First 50 Years, and The Ark Builder, Worship Through Woodworking, written with his father, and the foreword is by Rabbi Arnold Kushner. So David, I want to introduce, please join us now.
Rachel, thank you so much. But before I show you astrophilately, I just want to encourage people to contact Rachel after this call. You know, normally stamps are produced in the millions and sometimes the billions. So for there to be only 200 sheets of this means that this is a very limited edition. And so for people that are interested in Israel and Judaica and space, to get one of these sheets would be a nice gift or a nice thing for your collection, and it would help us to complete this documentary. So please, at the end of this, there are less than 100. My understanding is there are less than 100 sheets left. So contact her and get one of those sheets and help support the project. What I wanted to share with you is people exhibit something called astrophilately, and that's telling the story of the exploration of space through postage stamps. And it's not about the cachet. It's not the picture, the emblem over here of the eagle landing on the moon, and it's not the stamp. It's actually the postmark. So on the postmark, it says July 16th, 1969, which was the day that the Apollo 11 astronauts took off for the moon, and they left from the Kennedy Space Center in Florida. So the controlling event at that time was NASA in Florida, and so that would be the right cover. But if you wanted to tell the story of them walking on the moon, that wasn't controlled in Florida, that was actually controlled somewhere else. Slide. That was controlled in Texas. So to tell that story, you'd have to have an envelope that was canceled in Houston, Texas on July 20th, 1969. But you haven't completed telling that story until the astronauts are safe and home. And before the space shuttle, they used to land in the ocean by parachute, and they'd be rescued by the Navy. So in order to complete this story, you'd need to have an envelope that was canceled on the ship on the day that the astronauts came back, and that would be the USS Hornet on July 24th, 1969. Slide. And here you can see a picture of that. And I had an artist friend make an illustration on the cover so that people could understand this is what we're doing. We're telling the story of the exploration of space, and we're doing it through postage stamps and postmarks. But you know, for people that are not into telling the story of the astronauts, but maybe want to tell their own personal story, I wanted to share with you another part of exhibiting postage stamps, and one that you might want to do with your family. In the same way that people collect photographs and a scrapbook tells the story of your family, you can tell the story through your correspondence as well. So I was at a stamp club, and a older Jewish gentleman came up to me and he said, "Is there some story I can tell with these?" And he shows me a stack of postcards that were sent to his father, who was a material scientist with Bell Labs. And so these stamps are from all over the world. And you can see in the middle there, it says this postcard was from a scientist in Greece asking for a copy of a research paper that was in the Journal of Applied Physics. And so what Peter did, or what Peter's son did, is he collected all of this correspondence and also used stamps and was able to tell the story of his father's career. And then he took this to the local library and to his shul and to a stamp show, and was able to share with others things that are important to him and to his family. He's got this stamp here from Hungary, and it says, "At Singer, Peter showed the management of Singer how the sewing machine really worked by using ultra-high-speed photography." And then he worked on guidance systems for large boats and, enormous gyroscopes and things like that. So he delved into learning about his father and his career, and then shared that with people, but did it through old correspondence. And so that's a personal postal history exhibit. And after this call, I'm happy to work with anyone who'd like to take their old correspondence about their family, about their immigration, about their career, and to be able to tell a story philately about yourself and your loved ones. At this point, let me introduce Gregg. Gregg Philipson is retired from the biometric security industry. His works included projects with the U.S. federal and state law enforcement agencies, as well as federal governments. Gregg and his wife, Michelle, lecture internationally on Jewish-related subjects, including the Holocaust, propaganda art, and Jewish military history. The Gregg and Michelle Philipson Collection and Archive is regularly exhibited at major museums, universities, colleges, schools, as well as the U.S. military installations. Michelle's father was a survivor of the Holocaust. Governor Rick Perry appointed Gregg a commissioner to the Texas Holocaust and Genocide Commission. He served for many years as an advisory board member at Holocaust Museum Houston. Gregg?
Thank you, David. Gregg, please mute yourself and you can now share some of your collection.
Thank you, Colonel Ball, for that nice introduction. And I think that what I'd like to do is talk about some things that happened first in space, both from a Jewish perspective and from a international space perspective. And the first one that I'd like to talk about is the first Jewish cosmonaut, which is in essence an astronaut, in space, a guy named Boris Volynov. And in the reason I really like these two covers, these are two stamps commemorating Boris, who is still alive today at 85 years old and quite a big hero in the today Russia, but what was then the Soviet Union. So you'll see on the top one, that little sheet with the 4 astronauts on there. Boris is the one second to the left. And this is an important little sheet, and the date, as Colonel Ball said, is very, very important, because this is the time when their first Soyuz mission, Soyuz 5, which ran from January 15th to January 18th of 1969, it docked with Soyuz 4. And those are all 4 of the astronauts that were involved in those 2 missions when they joined up. And it's an interesting thing from a philatelic standpoint. It was sent to the United States, to Nyack, New York. It's a piece of airmail, registered airmail. But it's the cancel is very important. That's a cancel from a city in Russia, and in those specific dates. The other one, although the date doesn't match exactly, this is the 1976 mission of Soyuz 21. And that mission went from July 6th to August 24th. I believe it's an October 6th cancel from 1976. But again, it's a beautiful stamp with Boris on there, and you can see that that was postmarked in Moscow and sent to Seaside Park, New Jersey. I actually looked at looked up that address to see if who might live there today at Seaside at South Ocean Drive, but the house is new and it's probably worth about $3 million. But anyway, next slide, please.
Greg, maybe before I stop, maybe Jeff, do you know anything about this, or do you want to add anything?
You know, when Volynov flew back in those days, people did not emphasize their Jewish identity, and my understanding is he was not really aware of his Jewishness. It was discovered because on the passports in the Soviet Union at that time, his mother, he was not listed as a Jew, but his mother's passport apparently listed her as a Jew. And so, of course, that makes him officially Jewish. And as time went on, when he was made aware of this, he accepted this. And my understanding is he actually was invited and made a trip to Israel. And so it's a very nice story of him recognizing finally his Jewish identity.
It's interesting also, we collect more than just philatelic material, and I have 3 different Pravda newspapers, one from 1969 and 2 from 1976, and Boris is on splattered all over the cover of these, the communist newspaper, Pravda, from those missions. It was really sensational stuff and a major, major hero in the Soviet Union. Next, so this, one of my favorite Jewish astronauts for a lot of reasons is Judith Resnick from Akron, Ohio. And we talk about first, so she was the first Jewish American astronaut and also the first Jewish woman astronaut in space. Now, unfortunately, in 1986, Dr. Resnick was lost along with her 6 crew members, or other 6 crew members in one of the Challenger disaster. And, but this particular cover is a beautiful NASA portrait of Judy Resnick, second woman in space. And this is the...
I have to interrupt you because she was actually the second American woman in space. Because
yes, thank you, Jeff.
There were 2 Russians women who did fly earlier.
First American Jewish woman in space. And anyway, this is a great cover. And as you can see, the space shuttle on the cancel, they almost always say for benefits on Earth. So in other words, that the space missions were all to do something good for all of us here on this planet, in addition to whatever they were doing in space, the experiments. But this was the launch of, if we go back one, that's the launch date at the Kennedy Space Center of August 30th of 1984 for mission 41D. Next one, please. I just purchased this cover and I really was excited to get this. I've not seen this one before. You'll notice that this is not actually a mission. This is a shuttle landing orbiter simulation at White Sands, New Mexico at the missile range. Check out that incredible cancellation from July 11th of 1978. So she was the first woman candidate to participate in a T-38 shuttle simulation flight. And the T-38 shuttle, that's an aircraft by Northrop Grumman. It's called the Talon, and you see a little picture of it on the cachet. And that is as a matter of fact, for those of you who can see me, you'll see a T-38 helmet sitting behind me. Pretty rare to have one outside of outside of NASA. I haven't seen too many of those. But anyway, it's a fantastic cover of very early in her career. She was one of the first, she was a group of the first women astronauts. There were 6 women. And that was in January of 1978. And here she is now as the first woman candidate in this T-38 shuttle. It's a beautiful cover with a great piece of history. Jeff, do you know anything about that?
I'd like to know more, because actually we were selected. The selection was announced in January, but we actually didn't go and show up in Houston until the beginning of July. And we were not really qualified for T-38 flights for a while. So I'm not, this is a little bit strange to me. And I would want to go into the records to see what was actually happening. It's possible that she got an early flight there. But other than that, basically we would go out to White Sands, and you know, the shuttle, when it landed, until you were a few hundred feet above the ground, you would be screaming down at a very, very steep angle. And at about a second or two before you would hit the ground, you would pull up. And this was something that pilots were not really used to doing. And that's why they would practice this kind of maneuvers in a T-38. I did many of those as well myself. And it was really quite exciting. Of course, your life is in the hands of your pilot, who has to pull out at the right time. And of course, they always did. So this is quite unusual.
Okay, thank you.
Greg, maybe before we continue, Jeff, do you have anything maybe that you can share with us about Judith Resnick? Because if I remember correctly, you met.
Well, Judy was in my class. You know, we were both in the first class of space shuttle astronauts. So, you know, I trained with Judy and knew her quite well. Tragically, as Gregg said, she perished in the Challenger disaster in January of 1986. She was a great astronaut. She worked hard, very smart, and I liked her.
Well, now we're going to move into our favorite astronaut, Dr. Hoffman. And these are some things from our collections. And I'd like to talk about these, not necessarily from left to right, but we'll do it Hebrew style, from right to left. I'd like to look at STS-51D up in the top right corner. You see a little cachet, a picture of Jeff down in the bottom corner. But this is a beautiful cover from 1985. And if you'll notice, the cancellation is from the island of Guam, the U.S. Protectorate of Guam. So you can imagine how many of these might have been made. I suspect not a lot, but that was one of the tracking stations. And Jeff, it may be interesting if you share with us maybe something about that particular mission and why Guam was important.
I actually, a little later, I'm going to show a whole series of slides of covers from that mission, including this one, although it was not postmarked in Guam. First of all, let me make a comment about April the 12th, which is the date that we launched. April the 12th is a important date in astronautical history, because April 12th, 1961 was the date that Yuri Gagarin made the very first space flight. April the 12th of 1981 was the first mission of the space shuttle with John Young and Bob Crippen in command. And then, of course, it was the date of my own first space flight. And as I said, I'll talk in more detail about what we did on that flight a little later and illustrate it with some covers. as far as Guam, in the early days, the only way to communicate with the ground was through these tracking stations, and NASA set up a series of worldwide tracking stations, and eventually those tracking stations became superfluous because we put tracking and data relay satellites up in space. But at the time of this flight, we only had one tracking and data relay satellite, so it only covered a little less than half of the Earth. And so they still needed tracking stations on the other half of the Earth, and that's why Guam continued to be active. The next tracking and data relay satellite wasn't launched until after my first flight.
Okay, thank you. So the next one I'd like to look at would be Jeff's second space mission, which I believe was the STS-35, also known as Astro 1. And this is just a nice cover because this is the landing at Edwards Air Force Base. So sometimes we have covers that have the launch location and date, and this particular one is the retrieval of the mission, and at Edwards Air Force Base in California. And it's a beautiful image. You know, NASA always comes out, much like in the military, with a patch or an emblem or an insignia for a particular
I have
mission.
to tell you, NASA does not come up with those patches. That's the responsibility of the crew.
Crew,
in fact,
okay.
we often joke that one of the hardest parts of flying in space is designing your patch, but it is left to the responsibility of the crew. Of course, it has to be then approved by NASA, but we did that patch ourselves.
Well, you did a beautiful job on it. I like that one a lot. One of the interesting things we'll talk about later, even on the T-38 helmet that's sitting behind me, that was a kind of a commemorative helmet from another space tragedy. But they have the stars on there, and one of them is a Star of David, a 6-pointed star. The other 6 are 5-pointed stars that represent the crew of the shuttle Columbia. But anyway, continuing with this, the patch from STS-61 is on the far left there. And again, as Jeff just said, that you'll see his name on there, but that was apparently designed by the crew, another beautiful emblem. The one that I really wanted to talk about on this particular slide is on the top left, and that's mission STS-75. And you'll notice Jeff Hoffman's name is there, and that was canceled at the Kennedy Space Center. But you'll notice there's there's several astronaut names on there, but the one I'd like to point out is Dr. Scott Horowitz, another Jewish astronaut that was on the same flight with Jeff. And Jeff, the thing that I'd really like you to share with us about this particular cover is about the mezuzah that you shared with Dr. Horowitz on your bunk on that particular mission. So I'm going to turn it back to you.
Well, why don't we wait until because I have a series of slides and that is included. So I promise I will tell the story, but why don't you finish your presentation and then.
All right, that's good. Then we'll move ahead to the last astronaut that I'll be talking about. And Rachel mentioned Ilan Ramon, who was the first Israeli astronaut. He was a fighter pilot for the Israeli Air Force prior to entering the space program. But these are I have covers and different cancellations from the day that shuttle Columbia launched, and unfortunately when it disintegrated over Texas in 2003. But I thought instead of focusing on that, we might look at this beautiful sheet of commemorative stamps that the Israeli Post Office put out in a limited series of 1,000 sheets. And this is really a lovely cover. These were actually placed on an envelope. You can see the American and Israeli flags up above the image of Ilan Ramon on the big sheet and the Space Shuttle Columbia above that. But there were a few things, and this is in memory, and you'll also notice the cancel is from the Israeli Space Agency, and it's canceled in Naharal. And the reason it's canceled there, I think the Israeli Post Office felt it would be befitting. There is a large Israeli military cemetery there, and that is where Ilan Ramon is interred. So you'll notice this beautiful, it's actually a sticker. It's not a printed cachet of the low power transceiver experiment that took place on his mission. It was one of the things as a specialist that he was involved in. And you can see that cancel a little bit and how beautiful the stamp is on the right of the bottom one. But Ilan Ramon, we're talking about today, and Jeff is really going to go into detail about taking a Sefer Torah into space. But there's something that I thought I'd share with everyone today about STS-107, Ilan Ramon's mission. Although he took a number of things into space with him, one of the things that he took was a drawing by a young Jewish boy that was killed in the Holocaust named Peter Ginz, Petrginz. And he did an illustration in his diary that was found after he was murdered in the Holocaust. And he did one called Moonscape. And you can actually see this in his diary. Yad Vashem, the Holocaust Museum in Israel, allowed Ilan Ramon to take that with him. And it's quite a moving illustration because it showed what it would be like. He was transporting himself to the moon, kind of looking back at Earth, taking himself out of the internment camp that he was in. The other interesting part about this is Ilan Ramon created his own diary while he was in space. And it was, I think, 37 pages of his diary was among the 40% of the shuttle Columbia that was retrieved over Texas and parts of Texas. And it's been on display at a museum in Israel. So there's lots of really, really deep history, deep emotional things pertaining to a number of events, not only a tragic shuttle mission, but the Holocaust, and just so many different things about a kid that was lost, that was a brilliant young man. So I only bring that up if people are interested in using stamps to tell even a broader story of what's involved with these individual missions. So with that, I think I'm turning it back to Rachel and be available for questions.
Thank you very much, Greg. And I want also, I'm going to share, Jeff is going to share now some of his journey and some of his story. I just want to be also sensitive of the time. The plan is to finish it around in about 15 to 20 minutes. Before I turn over to Jeff, I just want to share with everyone that if you're interested in learning more about the Judaica Thematic Society, reach out to Gary. I'll put his email later on. If you want to learn more about David and how to write a story through communication, or to learn about astronaut philately in the past 50 years or more, please be in touch with him, or with Gregg for all of his vast wonderful collection. Again, I'm very thankful that I connected with all of you. And if you are interested to support the movie, we are doing for 1 week, we are selling these stamps because we want to raise the fund to finish the movie. So if you want to buy one, have one of these like historical beautiful stamps and support us, so please do it this week. Thank you. And I'm going to now unshare my screen, Jeff, so you can share yours. And you know what, Jeff, before I do that, maybe I'll share and show 30 seconds of the Space Torah.
Okay.
Let's see. So Jeff had original footage from space that is not available. It's about 5-6 minutes, and I'm going to share just 30 seconds from it.
Shalom. This is Jeff Hoffman aboard the Space Shuttle Columbia, mission STS-75. It's Shabbat morning in Jerusalem and Shabbat evening back in Houston, Texas. And this is a very special Shabbat in space because the members of my congregation, or Hadash, in Houston, have made it possible for me to carry on board an entire Torah, the whole scroll. It's a miniature Torah, but fully legible, and it's a unique occasion because this is the first time that this has ever been done, and what better time than Shabbat to read the very beginning of the Torah. With the vagaries of shuttle launch dates, I think it would have been a bit presumptuous to know exactly which passage to choose, and therefore I think it is appropriate to read the beginning because it is, in a sense, a beginning. Although the scroll itself is miniature, it's still too big for me to carry around, and so most of it is safely packed in the hold of the shuttle. However, I have detached the very first page, the beginning of the scroll, and made up
Okay, I will take over, and
Yes. Excellent. And while you're sharing, I just want to say we started with the stamps for Shabbat, kind of putting it in the mindset of what we know as Shabbat on earth. We light candles, we sip wine from a Kiddush cup. Of course, going to space, we will have to rethink about how to do those rituals. Jeff has pioneered Jew in space, over 5 space missions. You experimented with some of those. And maybe you can, as part of your presentation, you're going to share some of this and also give some advice as now with SpaceX and moving into continuing to go into this new frontier, and also your involvement currently with that.
Sure. Well, I thought I would start by taking off from what we saw before of some of the covers which represented the events of my very first space flight. You could see that April the 12th cancellation. This was done in Houston. You can see the whole crew. Let's see, hold on. Yeah, it was kind of interesting because originally we bounced back and forth between the shuttles Discovery and Challenger. So this was actually a mission patch which never flew, because in the end we were assigned to 4 different flights starting in June of 1984 and finally flew in April of 1985. Back in the early days of the shuttle, missions kept getting canceled and changed around, and we kept getting bumped from one mission to another and one shuttle to the other. But anyway, when we finally got ready, and then there are commemorative stamps. This is the work that was being done at the Kennedy Space Center to get our shuttle ready to fly. And then, of course, the initial launch on April the 12th. And it was another commemoration of the launch. It was an unusual flight, as it turned out. Our basic task was to launch these 2 commercial telecommunication satellites, one for Telesat of Canada and one for, actually it wasn't commercial, this was for the US Navy. Should have been an easy flight, about 4 days, go up, launch the first satellite on the first day, the second satellite on the second day, and then come home. But in fact, what happened when we launched the second satellite, this SYNCOM, it did not turn on. Nobody had anticipated that. Nobody really knew what to do about it, but they found that there was a little switch on the outside of the satellite. We didn't have any special equipment, but and possibly this little switch had not functioned properly. And so NASA proposed what turned out to be the very first unplanned contingency spacewalk in all of NASA's history, where there you see me. On every flight, two astronauts train how to use space suits just in case. But in fact, we were not planning to do a space walk, but they sent us out to attach these two tools, which they kind of look like fly swatters. So we became known as the SWAT team. You can tell us apart. This is the red stripe, which identifies me. And then the idea was that the very next day, we would go out, and this is the cover that you saw before.
Jeff, unmute yourself, Jeff.
So the next day after we had done our it was really a historic space flight because we, as I said, this is the very first time that people had gone out with no previous planning. Then the next day we flew up, we rendezvoused with that satellite, and we actually did flip the switch with the end of the robotic arm. And then, of course, we ended up staying a whole week, and this is the commemorative cover for the landing date of the shuttle, and we did land at the Kennedy Space Center. So those are, as you heard, you can tell a story with these covers, and that was the story of my first flight. What I want to show you now, and let me go back to bring up the other slides here. And I'm going to go full screen. Hold on a sec. Yeah, to show some of the commemorative objects. It was on my very first flight that a rabbi at our synagogue in Houston asked if I would be interested in taking some Jewish objects into space, and I was. He put me in touch with some Jewish artisans, and in fact, on all of my flights, I took mezuzot. I took on my first flight, I took the atarot, which were then put onto talisim for our two sons. I took a dreidel on the mission to fix the Hubble telescope, was during Hanukkah. By the way, the one thing that I was not allowed to take in space was matzah, because there are too many crumbs, and crumbs are a big hazard in space because they don't just fall on the floor, they float around. But this is the mezuzah that we were talking about on my last flight. Of course, you can't nail the mezuzah to the door of the shuttle. That would cause a leak, and you have to make some allowances. So as you see that yellow behind, that's actually Velcro. So on this flight, we had what we call 24-hour-a-day operations, and there were two shifts. And so we would share these sleeping compartments, and I would put the mezuzah in the sleeping compartment before I went to bed, and then I'd close the door. And when I got up in the morning, because I didn't know who was going to be using that bunk on the other shift, I would remove the mezuzah because I didn't want to, impose on anybody else with my own religious background. But probably after the fourth or fifth day, I must have forgotten to take it off, because when the second shift woke up, the person who had been sharing my bunk floated over to me and said, "Hey, Jeff, that was a nice idea, taking the mezuzah with you." And I sort of did a double take. And of course, it was Scott Horowitz, who had been sharing the bunk, and another Jewish astronaut. So after that, we just left it there for the rest of the mission. And in fact, the YIVO Institute in New York 2 years ago put on a exhibition of Jews in space, and they asked if they could exhibit some of the different artifacts. So you can see This is the mezuzah that was put up. This is a tefillah haderech with a prayer for travelers. The dreidel that I spun during Hanukkah, a little Hanukkah, a menorah. We were not allowed to light fires up in space. This is a Kiddush cup, again, not allowed to drink wine up there, but it was at least symbolic. And then the Yod, which I used when I was reading the Torah. And I'll just finish up with the happy ending of the Atorot and the Talisim. Oh, this is a picture of actually reading from the Torah. And as I mentioned before, this is the first page, which we removed from the Torah. It was then reassembled, and the rabbi then had a nice ceremony where he would scrape out a little bit of one of the letters, and everybody in the congregation got to perform the mitzvah of repairing the Torah. And then this is the Atorot for one of my sons, whose name is Oren, and you can see the constellation of Orion. This is from the voice from the whirlwind in the book of Job. And this was then sewn onto a hand-woven talit. And we used the talisim from both of these, are both of our sons, our older son and younger son. And you can see this is the huppah, and we decorated the huppah with the talisim, and that's the atorot, which went into space. And I'm glad to say that we just came back from a visit with them and their 6-month-old daughter, who is now our third grandchild. So a happy ending to all of this. And as I said, these Jewish artifacts, some of them, we have a mezuzah. One of the mezuzahs is on the door of the Science Museum in Jerusalem. And it's was a privilege and a pleasure to be able to share some of these Jewish objects in the exhibition in New York. And we were planning for another exhibition in Maryland before the COVID hit, but hopefully sometime in the next year or so, we'll be able to do that. So in the interest of time, Rachel, I'll finish there and stop sharing and let you take over for maybe some questions if we have time for that.
Yeah, I know that I know that also on Facebook, people ask me questions about time and space, and how do, what can we do with Shabbat, when sunrise and sunset coming so often? So there are questions like that, if you want to just say a word or two.
Well, it's not, space travel, of course, is not the first time that you have to deal with that. If you go to any place above the Arctic Circle, there are times when the sun never rises, and there are other times in the year where the sun never sets. And so you have to make certain allowances, and the rabbis have dealt with those. They say, well, you can use the time in Jerusalem if you want to. Basically Judaism has a certain flexibility involved, and it is a traveling religion. It was really a wonderful coincidence, in fact, but I took advantage of that when we had finished all of our repair activities on the Hubble Space Telescope, then I had time to perform the ceremony reading for the Torah, and it did happen to be late Friday night in Houston and early Saturday morning in Jerusalem, which was just perfect. So we had from the evening to the morning of Shabbat when I was able to perform this ceremony for the first reading of a Torah in space. But you have to be flexible.
Yeah, so there's a question in the comment box: how does a dreidel spin in space?
Forever. That was one of the comments that I made. And by the way, if you go on Google and you can Google dreidel in space or Hanukkah in space, and that video is freely available. But yeah, it it just keeps spinning. So of course the dreidel was originally used as a little gambling device because you would see which side it fell on, and that depended on whether you won or lost. But you have to be flexible when you're in space, and sometimes you have to change the rules of certain things. So I was kind of speculating on how you could actually play dreidel in space, and I never really did come up with a good answer because it just keeps on spinning.
Thank you, Jeff. I want to be respectful of time. Now it's noon, and I know that you have another meeting coming soon. I'm happy to stay here for another 15 minutes if anyone have any questions.
I can stay for another five minutes or so if there's anything specifically directed at me, Rachel.
Okay, so is there any other questions for Jeff? Is anyone want to ask or comment? Unmute yourself and if I'm missing anyone, you can unmute yourself and you can ask, because we have 3 screens full with participants.
Hi, Jeff, and thanks for the presentation. It is just wonderful and such an honor to meet you this way. I know some of the Apollo astronauts took covers into space with them. Did you have a chance to do something like that?
By that time, it was prohibited.
Because of that, probably.
Because of that, exactly.
Yeah, thanks.
No, we are allowed to take what they call a personal preference kit of up to 20 items of personal significance. They can be religious items, but you're not allowed to take coins or first day covers, stamps, and the like because of the problems it was really Apollo 15 that brought that to a head.
Yeah, I'd like to jump in there for just a moment. If people are interested in getting an envelope that was carried on the space shuttle, if you go on eBay, you can find ones that were carried on the Challenger. The Postal Service for STS-8 in 1983 put up about 500,000 covers, and they sold them for $15 a piece. And so if you go on eBay, you can still find them for $15 or $20.
Yeah, that was done with full NASA approval,
right,
basically for the publicity. But we as individual astronauts were not permitted to do that.
You didn't get to cash in.
It's okay. What I did is not something that I could have paid for, so I have no complaints.
Jeff, maybe before you leave us, is there any message you want to share with us? Again, looking at the world from a different perspective and thinking where we're going.
Well, it is a fundamentally different perspective, and looking at the world from space, there's a contrast because most of the Earth is extremely beautiful. And we never got tired of looking out the window. But on the other hand, sometimes it can be scary because you actually see the effect that humanity has had on our environment in terms of pollution, of deforestation of the rainforests. And it really reinforces the responsibility that we have, part of Tikkun Olam, I think, of saving and improving the universe, that you do see our Earth as a finite planet, which intellectually, people who have thought about this, of course, we know that our planet is finite, that it can't tolerate continued abuse forever. But somehow when you actually go up and see it, that feeling is much stronger. Many astronauts, even if they didn't have strong feelings about this before, regardless of their political persuasions, come back with much more of an environmental sensitivity because we really do see the finiteness of our planet, how thin our atmosphere is, this thin little blue line you see on the horizon. Which it makes you realize, you just can't keep putting things into the atmosphere forever and assume that it's not going to have any planet-wide impact. So It's something that I really hope more people will get a sense of. And as we're moving into the era of private space flight, and some of the early private space travelers obviously will be from the more wealthy and influential part of our population, that maybe this message will become more widespread. I think it's absolutely critical for people to realize that we live on spaceship Earth, and we have to take care of our environment on Earth just like we do take care of the environment inside a spaceship.
Thank you so much, Jeff. I know that you need to leave. I just want to share again that I want to thank all of the presenters today and all of you that also joined us and listened. And we are recording this, so it's going to be available to share with other people. Thank you all for the opportunity to learn from all of you. And thanks all of you for your passion. Thanks, Jeff, and your community for everything that you've been doing. And you're still very involved with the Mars and other things that are going to happen this summer. And we are all going to follow up. And I hope that we will be able to share more learning like this also through the Judaica Thematic Society. We're going to do other sessions on different topics, but also stay tuned for more things about Space Torah and this wonderful journey in space.